Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Zession. If you are new here, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And if you are joining us again, thank you so much for returning and for being here and for all of your ongoing support. We appreciate you so much, probably more than you know. My name is Mandy Rourke, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in Austin, Texas, and I am also a co-founder of Zesho.
And I'm Dr. Sapna Srivastav, also a co-founder of Zesho, which is a mental health resource platform that we've started. And we have Sessions as our podcast in which we also amplify conversations amongst clinicians. So we talk about topics that are typically addressed in the mental health world so that y'all can hear perspectives of clinicians who support clients on a regular basis.
Yes, and today we are so excited to talk about this topic. Our topic is the experience of a breakup. Dun, dun, dun. It's a big topic. There's so many different directions we are going to aim to take this conversation, and we're so excited to have Bianca Segura here with us today. And we are just pumped to talk to you about this. We've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, and we would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, your specialty, and maybe why this topic is something that you're interested in talking about with us as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. As you said, my name's Bianca Segura. I'm a marriage and family therapist in Austin, Texas. I specialize in working with teens and young adult women, particularly people who self-identify as overthinkers. I really enjoy working with people with relational stress, self-esteem issues, and navigating life transitions. So I don't know, with that, I know we're focusing on breakups today, which I think falls in line with the population I tend to work with. And I have seen a lot of breakups in my practice over the years. So I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah. So we are eager to start talking about breakups. But before we do, I just want to go over a couple things to help us in our mission to support folks who can benefit from our resources, such as the podcast. If you do enjoy our content, please do consider liking, following, giving a positive rating and or review on any and all podcast platforms that you listen to us on or you enjoy. Those ratings and reviews help more people find our content, and obviously then more people can benefit from our content, which is our intention. Additionally, you can also follow us at My Zesho on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, for more access to our mental health resources. You can also find us at zesho.com. That's zessio.com, and at My Zesho is myzessio.
All right, it's game time. Y'all ready for this? So as many of you that have been with us on our journey of sessions, we always like to start these conversations off by really describing what we mean when we say certain topics, just to kind of set the scene, set the stage, get everyone on the same page and have that clarity. And so when we say break up, what do we mean by that?
Well, I think in this conversation, you'll probably hear me refer to romantic relationships when talking about breakups. But I mean, a breakup can mean, the ending of any significant relationship, whether it is a romantic relationship or a friendship, or workplace relationships, or even your relationship to a specific place. It's difficult adjusting to endings and then the new beginnings on the other side of that. And so I think what we'll be talking about today can be applicable to many different types of relationships.
I love it. And why is this topic so important, do you think?
I mean, it's a common experience for a lot of people, and it can be so disorienting, so disruptive to our daily lives, our other relationships. I think there tends to be a ripple effect when one relationship ends. And so, yeah, like I said a minute ago, it tends to come up a lot in therapy. Even, the process of making the decision to end a relationship, or if a client is blindsided by the end of a relationship, and unsure of what life is going to look like on the other side of that. Yeah. And, I think it's a wonderful time for anybody who's never been to therapy. That's, I've gotten clients who don't know what to do when they're going through a breakup, and that is just great fodder for therapy.
Yeah, agreed. I think it really does, like you said, kind of impacts us in all these different ways. And so whether it's socially, in our other relationships and future relationships and current relationships, and the relationship we have with ourselves, and just our day-to-day processes, it can just like have that ripple effect, like you said. And so I agree that it's something, and yet it's also so like abstract, and like how you deal with it too. Like there's no like guidebook of like how to actually like step by step go through this, which can be very frustrating when you're like, what do I do? Like, how do I do this?
That actually reminds me though, one time when we were talking with Bianca about this topic a while back, you were saying that some of the stuff that you found out there, like on YouTube and stuff. What?
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Yeah. If you ever Google or get on YouTube, like what to do in a breakup, there is some trash advice out there, just straight up trash.
Yeah.
And if you ever are asked to buy anything relating to a breakup, I don't know that you need to.
Yes.
Because there's no one way to move through this process or adjust to this change. It's so personal and individualized. And so, yeah, I think that's what we'll be talking about today, is like trying to speak generally about something so personal.
Yeah.
And how you help clients with that, like just the therapeutic experience of that, because I know, we'll get into this more, but there's just so many different layers of it, and it's so complex and so challenging because I think it's such a like natural reaction to be overwhelmed and lost in those moments. As the breakup is maybe approaching or directly after the breakup. And so I'm excited that we get to kind of peel back some of those layers today, because I think that a lot of people feel really alone when that happens, of like, is this just me? Or, why is this so hard? This shouldn't be this hard type of thinking. And really, yeah, like I would say, I mean, I know we're not supposed to generalize, but most breakups are challenging and tough.
Right. And sometimes even surprisingly so. Like you could see this coming, the event happens, and still on the other side of it, you're like, oh, this is more intense than I realized it would be. Or how come no one ever told me how bad this hurts? My friends seem fine when they went through it, and this is feeling really disorienting and disruptive.
Yeah, that makes me think of too, when you're saying that, like, even if you see it coming, even if you're the one to initiate the breakup, and again, in any context of romantic or otherwise, like, I think there's like a myth out there that that's not also as painful as the person who's on the receiving end of the breakup and might be blindsided. And like that for sure is painful, but there's also a lot of pain that comes with being the one to initiate that I don't think is as normalized. And like people can really like be harsh on themselves of like, I shouldn't feel this way, but that's not realistic.
Right. Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't think we talk too much about that experience, especially in like pop culture. We see a lot more representations of the blindsided breakup, where like that, when you're the one initiating the breakup, that can be so challenging. I mean, you're making a conscious choice to disrupt the norm, your norm and somebody else's. And again, acknowledging the ripple effect of that, it's changes a lot. And that can be a hard decision to, contend with. And then the aftermath, there's seemingly less sympathy for that person, when it's still just as hard a lot of the times.
We're already kind of starting to dive into the struggles of the breakup, and I feel like that just makes sense because it is a struggle, right?
Yeah.
And as you were just saying that, Bianca, it was making me think about how much avoidance is also attached to breakups. Like if you are the one maybe initiating or feel that you initiate, I've definitely worked with people or know people who they've been in a relationship for a long time, and maybe they're not satisfied, but it's like not the worst thing, it's not the best
Mhm.
thing, but there's another podcast that we did a while back around having hard conversations, and
Mhm.
it's not just having a hard conversation. It's like that's definitely part of it, but you also know that I'm about to have a hard conversation that could be, like you were saying, like shattering the norm. It's also like, could really bring about so much like deep pain for another person, and like
Right.
heartache, like actual like heartbreak, and
Mhm.
so like I understand why people like hesitate in having those hard conversations, but I think it would be kind of interesting to hear y'all's take on how you would help clients, in that process of knowing like a breakup is likely going to be the next step, but how do you know like when to initiate that or when to walk away? And this is a very loaded question. And also like, what would be almost like the first step in that?
Mhm. What immediately comes to mind is like the honesty that has to take place, which can be so uncomfortable, like even just with yourself, like honestly acknowledging what's not working or what you wish could happen that isn't happening.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of like discomfort and grief just in and that's like pre-breakup contemplation stage.
Mhm.
And so that can be really dysregulating to sit in that honest space with yourself. And if you are in therapy, I would encourage anybody to bring that honesty to the therapeutic space, to just sit with and kind of strategize around that or just make decisions. It can be so helpful to have somebody that you trust with that level of honesty. But yeah, but I've certainly worked with clients in the past where that was kind of a slow burn. And I would never rush a client to make a decision. And again, I think this is, breakups are such a personal, individualized situation that sometimes that's just what it takes. And I wouldn't want anybody to judge their process with that. It's a big decision.
Mhm.
Yeah, it truly is. And like it can, I mean, I know there's many sessions that I've worked with clients around that like we spent so much of our time dissecting like, is this relationship worth staying in, worth giving the effort? Like it can span quite a few sessions sometimes.
Mhm.
And oftentimes we end up at, no, it's not quite worth staying in. Not all the time necessarily for
Mhm.
sure, but when we're spending most of our time contemplating, it's usually working up to something.
Right.
And so, but taking your time in that, I think that's a good reminder for people of like it has to go at your own pace, and you get to decide when, and you get to process how
Mhm.
you decide that, and like if it's worth kind of it's ultimately weighing like is it worth the effort and the pain and the change and that feeling of like I have to start all over again too,
Mhm.
and kind of people sometimes wanting to avoid that feeling or that um possibility of like it's not, I'll have to start from scratch, I'll be starting from nothing all over again when I've sunk like 2, 3, 10, 20 years into this, like um so yeah, there's so many things to consider essentially, but like
Mhm.
you're allowed to do it at your own pace.
Well, and I also think too, as you're saying, both of y'all were talking right now, I was thinking about the contradiction of emotions that people are up against too, because it's like maybe the relationship is no longer serving them, whichever relationship that might be, but it doesn't mean that all feelings are gone. Like there could still
Right.
be love, a deep sense of love and care and admiration for this person that, is part of this of like, I'm having to work through those feelings as I'm also having to reconcile the fact that this relationship isn't serving me or
Mhm.
maybe even the other person to its fullest, which I think is just like, as I'm saying that, it just is confusing, like how do I unpack that? Which is like so great that we have therapists like you, Bianca, to help, like, let's unpack this. Let's, like you were saying, the contemplation of that, like, and to Supna's point, it takes a lot of time to really be considerate of all the different facets within that before you actually prepare to have that hard conversation.
Mhm. Yeah. And I will oftentimes encourage clients to like, you know, think about their side of the road in this. How are they going to feel? Like, did they do their due diligence? Did they communicate? Did they, advocate for themselves? All these things, so that at the end of the day, if they do decide to end their relationship, they can maybe, sleep a little easier at night. Like, I really tried. And so I would encourage clients, when appropriate, to be thorough in making this decision.
Mhm. Yeah, having that like attitude of nothing's left on the table. I did everything
Exactly.
in my control and my power and my effort that I could have, and I
Hmm.
won't have any questions lingering. Or I'll have less questions lingering at least,
Right.
as far as like what I could have done differently or more or what have you,
Hmm.
which I think is definitely a great marker to use too, of like what questions might you have if you were to go through with this that you have not addressed yet at this point.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I was also wanted to broaden it too of like, what are, I mean, we were touching on this already, but what are other kind of struggles that y'all have seen as therapists that folks encounter kind of in dealing with breakups? Maybe
Hmm.
it's once they actually happen. We've been talking about a lot of like, how do you know when to do them? But when they make the decision, they do it. What are things that you tend to see in
Hmm.
sessions with clients?
Something I've noticed that maybe doesn't get talked about a lot is when when a breakup happens, it's pretty common to want to share that with your support system, your friends and family. And I think because breakups are so common, people tend to offer a lot of unsolicited advice, compare your situation to theirs. Some uncomfortable truths might come out, like, oh, thank God, or, like, oh, I never liked them anyways. And I think that is all oftentimes like super well meaning. People, they don't want you to feel sad, they want you to feel connected with. Um, and at the same time, no two breakups are alike because no two relationships are alike. Relationships are co created by the people directly involved in them, and no one on the outside is really going to have an understanding of the nuances of that. Um, and so, yeah, when our friends and family try to compare their situation to ours, it can, in a weird roundabout way, feel like somewhat dismissive, or like, well, you're not getting it then. If you think my situation is just like yours, then you're not hearing what I'm saying. And so again, I think that's what therapy can offer is, if you're bringing your breakup to therapy with me, I'm going to maintain a neutral stance. I'm not going to tell you like, oh, I saw this coming, or oh, I can relate, let me tell you about my breakup. Like, that's not going to happen in the therapy room. And so I think offering the type of support that is almost always like offered right out of the gate is just that neutrality. Like, we're going to dive into your situation because your situation is unique. And we are going to take as much time as it needs to parse through everything that is maybe hard to get other people to understand. So I like to offer that space for people to just focus on their experience and not necessarily breakups in general.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I just feel like it's such a good sell for therapy, but mostly through the lenses, like what do we tend to do when we go through hard things? We do go to our friends and family for
Mm-hmm.
support, and it almost can, um, this feels like a harmful thing to say, but it can almost like harm you in the process a little bit of like reconciling what just happened because of that
Mm-hmm.
comparison. It's almost like it muddies, like you're already so overwhelmed with what your experience is. And now it's like you have all these voices in your mind of like, well, what did they say? And they say, and they say, and they say, and like just trying to kind of make sense of all of that. And so it almost is like you already might feel lost. And then that just further
Mm-hmm.
perpetuates that feeling of like, I like, you know what? Well, my mom told me this. So like, I'm going to think that. But, it's like, hold on, hold on. Like, I just really appreciate what you're saying because it's like, I think that anyone that would work with you would come to you and be able to really go internal and really process, like, what
Mhm.
do I feel like? What are my struggles with this? And like, what's important to me? And how do I make sense of this just according to my own inner self, inner needs that are present there, which,
Mhm.
yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. It's going to illuminate like a lot of other things. Like I think going to therapy for a breakup is a point of entry, but you're going to learn a lot about yourself and why this is so hard. What was it about this person? Um, so yeah, I think it's really important to process your unique experience.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And maybe even like kind of the reaction that you're having to what other people are saying about your breakup too can also be really illuminating as well. It's going
Mhm.
to be completely valid. Like having some kind of reaction to other people's reactions
Right.
is normal.
Right.
But also if like there's specific people who are having a specific reaction that you're having a specific reaction to. I'm thinking of like a parent or a sibling or
Mhm.
even like a best friend, then maybe it's saying something about your relationship and how kind of you view your actions in the context of their perspectives to a degree too, which can be really hard to separate from, as you were saying, Mandy, like when you're already trying to process through what you're
Mhm.
feeling yourself, let alone having to carry on. Like when you were saying that, actually, I was kind of having like this image coming to my mind of like, we've already secured ourselves a new piece of baggage, which we all have.
Mhm.
We all have, and that's just a new piece that we've taken on just now. And then we might have other people kind of just throwing on pieces of their own baggage of like, here's a backpack, here's a purse, here's, another piece of luggage sometimes.
Mhm.
And that can be that much heavier to carry after, we've shared that with our support system. But that therapy can be really helpful in kind of setting it all down and be like, what
Mhm.
the hell is this? And I don't know how to feel about it all. And I'm overwhelmed.
Right. Yeah. There's something about breakups that just really people feel free to project all over you if you're the one going through a breakup. And I've been guilty of it myself,
Mhm.
but sometimes that can be disruptive to your processing of the experience. And yeah, like you're saying, it just kind of adds on. If you're already in a confused headspace and now you have all these opinions and you should do this and I would do this, it's just going to be even more confusing.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about social stuff and like kind of to carry through on this too, where I had a friend long ago that I remember her telling me about how her sister broke up with her boyfriend and she was like certifiably upset by this and gave her sister a hard time. Like, what are you doing? Why are you breaking it? Like, this is the one for you. And like, I'm kind of repeating myself on what I was saying before, but just in a different context where I just think that the social piece of that is really hard too, because it's like, okay, like, yes, this person has gotten to know my family or they've gotten to become friends of my friends. And now, you're saying this is like a projection, like it's like their pain and their discomfort and this person no longer fitting in that role in my life somehow
Mhm.
like bleeds into like, is this my fault? Like, it's not, I'm not doing anything wrong here by ending it like that sister and sister combo, like she did what was right for her and
Mhm.
that was not her job to deal with her sister's like issues with that, right? But I felt
Right.
for her sister at the time in that conversation, like, hey, like, like let her do what she needs to do. But I'm
Mhm.
curious of like what y'all have observed or helped clients with when it comes to just like those other social layers when it comes to breakups.
Yeah. That, I mean, there's there's all sorts of avenues for grief in a breakup. I mean, certainly the one with the person you shared the relationship with, but also their family members, their friends, the community you created together that now might have to look differently. And you might lose friends in the process or support system in the process. And yeah, that's just, you know, more grief needing to be processed. And I am a huge proponent of like feeling all of that, like allowing yourself to acknowledge the magnitude of grief that you're experiencing and just, yeah, feeling all the feelings.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, and I was gonna say, going back to kind of the example that you gave, Mandy, as well, of like and this is purely from, you know, me as a woman and as a woman of who's part of the Indian culture and a collectivist culture, and also one that very much pushes the idea that women need a man, that it can be really easy for folks in your life to kind of turn it on you and do kind of what that sister did of like, you need to do this differently. Like, what are you doing wrong? What did you do to make this happen? And so recognizing like that might just be like cultural noise or familial message noise that is not yours to take on necessarily. It can be hard.
Mhm.
That's easier said than done to distance yourself often from that, especially when it's already kind of um ingrained in you, but that's not necessarily yours to carry, especially when you're already carrying so much on yourself too.
Mhm.
So just wanted to like throw that in there because there's also often many like cultural contexts to consider as well. Both, I mean, generally, but also kind of more specifically too. There's a lot of social stuff that tends to play into place. And, you know, conversely for men too, like, you know, them feeling some kind of way. I can't speak to that at this point. I'm too ingrained. I'm not going to try to right now. I'm very much in the women's perspective, but I'm just going to
Mhm.
acknowledge there is a different perspective for men too, and I'm sure lots of messages and uh things that are put on to them that are also not necessarily theirs to take on, especially when they're dealing with breakups themselves.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, and as we're talking about this, it makes me think about how heavy the experience is. And, as Bianca, you're saying, like, I have to feel all the feelings. And within those feelings, I definitely know that there can be a lot of feelings of like self-doubt and like an impact on like how you feel about yourself just in general too. So,
Mhm.
one part of this we're talking about is like if you're the person like initiating the breakup, but then also to be on the receiving end of that, how painful that is, but then also like from an esteem perspective of like, am I not good enough? Or, what could I have done better? Like kind of that self criticism and just doubt within, yeah, like, is it me? So
Mhm.
how do you help clients when it comes to the self-esteem or the self-doubt, or like trusting themselves? And a lot of different
Mhm.
layers there, but
Yeah.
mm,
Um, well, like I will certainly hold space to allow a client to ask all those questions, like say them out loud. Like, what if I did this or that? If I was prettier or more fun, would it mean something different for the outcome of this relationship? And once that's kind of out, I tend to show up as a therapist as authentically as possible. And whenever somebody's like, well, maybe I just wasn't fun enough. It's like, oh, well, that sounds exhausting to have to be fun 24/7 for the rest of your life, theoretically. Or like, if I'm not pretty enough, like, so what are you going to do? How can you be the prettiest version of yourself all the time? Like, you can't. That sounds exhausting. And so it kind of lends itself to a conversation of, wouldn't it be nice, or maybe what would it look like to be able to be who you are today authentically all the time and have someone embrace that and love that and celebrate that, versus trying to pigeonhole yourself into a package that this one person really likes. Like, I truly believe that there are people out there who will like everything about you, will be fascinated about you, will, not need you to be anything other than you are. And I think when you kind of shift the conversation that way, it's it like lends itself to self-acceptance. Like, you don't have to be anything other than who you are. Be your messy imperfect self and learn to love that and embrace that. And someone else will. Your friends do, your family like does. There's no reason to believe that there's not other people out in the world that will not ask you to be anything else.
oh man, I hate that I'm about to make this plug, but I don't know if y'all watch Emily in Paris. I don't want to do any spoiler alerts.
I haven't watched the
Guilty.
last season, Mandy.
Guilty
I've seen the
pleasure.
first season. Yeah.
Okay, guilty pleasure, guilty pleasure. So I don't want to give too much away for someone who could be upset by the spoiler, but well, now I'm really hesitating because this is gonna be tricky to say without giving it away. But the point is that there was just a moment where there was a relationship that was playing out, and it was very similar to what you were describing there, Bianca, of like someone not really initiating a breakup, but that ended up being the outcome of it based on them trying to coerce this person to be someone that they were not, right?
Mhm.
And so maybe I'm bringing this up because it's one of those hard things of like everything's going great here, but all of a sudden someone is expecting me to be that prettier or more composed or whatever
Mhm.
version of myself. And so, oh man, I feel like I'm taking us a completely different direction here, but I think it's just interesting to see how tricky it is even in that space to know when to call it, of like,
Mhm.
wow, like I could be, if I was this person and I met this person's needs, then this relationship would sustain. But if I'm not, then it won't. And then does that then mean that I'm not enough? Or like, how do you make sense of all of that after the fact? So, anyways, I
Mhm.
digress. That was a bad example because like you gotta watch the show, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's just
But
tricky
yeah.
because I love what you said though. It's like there's not just it's not just that one person. Like, I love that there are so many millions and millions and millions of people of
Mhm.
the world that would appreciate you and all of your everything, like exactly as you are today. And it's like, I think that's maybe I'm jumping way ahead here, but I'll just say it for the sake of trying to make this example work, which is that it's like helping clients also process that like you are you for a reason. You are the only you that there is.
Yes.
And how do we embrace that after the breakup versus
Mhm.
like turn it into like, I need to be something different for that to have worked. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
there
Yeah,
it
and there
is.
can often like feel like I need to work on myself so that like I can be like the best version of me before I meet the next person or I get
Mhm.
into the next relationship. And like to a degree, that makes sense, especially if in processing what you've just gone through in the breakup, right? Of like, what do you need to learn from that? What were things that you can take away that you can work on to either not bring into the next relationship or be aware of or be able to kind of do a little more work with,
Mhm.
etc. But also at the same time, like you're perfectly amazing the way that you are. And like this just wasn't meant to be. And that can be really, really hard. Also feeling like there's nothing that I can do that's in my control to change that outcome. And putting it on myself feels like a way that I can control it when it might be like a false sense of control.
Mhm.
But it makes it more painful for me too if I'm taking that on oftentimes. And so just recognizing like that might be a way of coping for some of us is to kind of blame ourselves as well, but that it's really so much more. And if you zoom out, like you are amazing just in this moment as you are, and nothing about your relationship status or what anyone else says about you defines you
Mhm.
other than yourself.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of breakups tend to boil down to like we're either going to grow together or we're going to grow apart. And so you can kind of be reflective in like how what was preventing me from growing or them preventing them from growing with me, like um yeah, because I'm trying to think of how to say this exactly, but um I don't know, I just think that we should, always be striving to grow and evolve, but we should also hold room in our relationships to do that as well. And I think like if you're in a relationship where it feels like you are being asked to grow in a specific way or told like, no, no, you're changing too fast, I liked the old you, like that's, you know, probably not the right relationship for you. And relationships are complex, there's a lot of nuance in them, but sometimes they are kind of binary in that way, like is this person encouraging the type of growth that I want for myself, or are they asking me to be some other version that they picture me as, or the type of partner that they want that just isn't inherently natural to me. So yeah, kind of rambling there, but um, I think there's something to be said about having an awareness for that and kind of chalking it up to that. If you're unclear about how to make sense of it, like that's okay. That happens, and it's a good thing to recognize.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that's the reframe too after a breakup, to be able to really process, like, why was there such a gridlock there, and what does that
Mm-hmm.
say about what my needs are? And it does give that opportunity to just go really deep within yourself when, in a lot of relationships, you have so much direct feedback from another person, right? So you're having
Right.
to, like, okay, like, I hear that, and also, like, how do I reassess, like, what's important to me and like what my authentic needs are, which is an
Mm-hmm.
ongoing process in the relationship. But I love what you said about, we're either going to grow together, we're going to grow apart, because I also believe that like, people evolve. Like, we don't just,
Right.
stay the same, even if people have more of a fixed mindset. Each and every day is a new day, and there's different experiences that happen that create change. And so it's just interesting to kind of think through all of those complexities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that too. And I also made me think of like kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier of like how do you know when to walk away? Like that could be a really good marker too of like if am I growing in a direction that is authentic and congruent for me and what I want for myself in my future? Are they
Mm-hmm.
supporting that, or are they wanting me to grow in a different direction? Are they growing in a completely different direction? And
Mm-hmm.
kind of assessing all of those and what feels right for you and letting you decide like what's right as far as the direction that you want for your life. And
Right.
if they align with that, um, but there's also so many other contexts to like consider too. Like sometimes if your lives are super enmeshed at that point,
Mm-hmm.
if you have kids together or pets together, you're sharing rent together or even a mortgage, like it can be a really complicated decision. It can be a really complicated separation at that point too, that can really weigh on people too and really make people double think too of like, is this really going to be worth the decision? How am I going to handle all of that? Like that sounds awkward AF. Like, I mean, what do I do? And so even just game planning some of that to a degree, I've done that with clients before in
Mm-hmm.
sessions. Are there
Right.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, and I would encourage clients to do their due diligence with that. Like there's a lot of logistics, sometimes involved in a relationship, and there's no need to rush through that or rip the band-aid off. Like it is a life skill to be able to tolerate the discomfort of that, like just sitting in it because you know it's best and you want to make the right like long-term decision for yourself and your family if there's kids involved. And so yeah, as uncomfortable as it is, I think it is worth it to take your time in the untangling of a breakup.
Yeah.
Well, I was kind of thinking about that too, of like, if your lives are intertwined, or maybe there are still friends that are shared, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe not. I mean, maybe it's just like the breakup was amicable. Like, what kind of conversations do you have with clients around like communicating with their ex-partner?
Ooh, yeah. Um, it depends. Like if, in the immediate aftermath of a breakup, if you're by yourself and every time you get a notification on your phone, your heart drops a little bit and you're like, oh, is it them? Or if you do see their name pop up on your phone or even scrolling through Instagram, like I think it's so important in the immediate aftermath to check in with like your nervous system. Like, how are you physically feeling? And then make decisions based on your comfort level. And I love that technology kind of gives us different like levels of severity of that. Like you can block, you can mute, you can ignore, you can report if you really want to on social media. Um, but yeah, and so we have options for like limiting the communication that we have with them, and that's assuming that like kids aren't involved. because that might require a level of accessibility, but I would still encourage boundaries around that. Like, you know, not responding after a certain time or only discussing the kids. Like, but I think the way that you determine that is really listening to like your gut and your body on that, because I think it will tell you. And if it feels dysregulated or disrupted at all, like you're allowed to take care of yourself and set those boundaries.
That's smart.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a great point of like technology has grown to be able to adjust to giving us multiple options. It's
I
so
love the
true.
mute button.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
so like no one needs to know that I'm not receiving your content or that I'm not pressed or anxiously waiting for your text message.
Right, exactly. It's like an unfollow without officially doing that, which we support that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But also if, you know, we just want to give ourselves immediate relief without maybe gradually like easing into the process of cutting off. That's a thing too. Not cutting off, but easing out of communication on a regular basis with someone. The mute button is glorious for sure.
It really boils down to like, how do you protect your peace? I mean, you're already going through so
Exactly.
much processing of this. Like, I love just being in touch with your body and what is my body telling me? And you know, I think that is one of those reframes of like, maybe that's the first time for you to really get in touch with your body too. Maybe there are some times during the breakup you might have felt some of that discomfort and intellectualized your way through it, you know, because of like all the things that we've been talking about of, you know, this person's great, or I want this to work out, or I've been single for so long, like this has to work out, you know. But I think that is just a key learning that happens, that it's like, how do I protect, like, so I feel as at ease as I can, you know. Not easy though.
Right. And I mean, acknowledging again for you what is right, because there might be many other people in your circle, not unlike when you share the news of your breakup at first, who will have opinions on how slash if slash when you do communicate with an ex or keep in touch in some form or fashion. And ultimately, it's up to you and your beliefs. I'm of the opinion that it's not super black and white about, you know, you should have no contact with an ex
Right.
ever after a breakup. But some people do subscribe to that. And so just kind of understanding like what's right for you. If that is right for you, by all means, like cut it off. But if you're the type who's like, I think eventually I might want to be friends and I would like to be open to that, like that's maybe when the mute button is really our friend. So just acknowledging like truly what is right for you and your beliefs, and taking into account sometimes our support system sees things that we don't and is trying to give us advice that they think is helpful for our nervous system. And we just take in that information, take it under consideration, and be like, okay, is this actually right for me or not?
Absolutely.
You know, one thing that I'm kind of redirecting for a second, but I think about, you know, it doesn't even, I can't even give you like a specific amount of time that you might be in the relationship with a person, but, you know, you tend to start doing a lot of things with this person, whether it be, you know, your day-to-day activities, you're going to the gym together, you're watching shows together, you're like, you know, insert whatever other example. Like, I mean, I guess I'll share personally that I had a friendship breakup long ago, and I didn't realize how many playlists we had connected, that I was like, oh my God, I need to go through and unsubscribe to all of these that are like all of the memories and things like that. But I'm thinking about like the process of reacclimating to life without that person in it. If you get so accustomed to having them be the first person that you text or the first person that you call, you know, what are some ways that y'all see this kind of play out in those therapy conversations around helping clients redirect their day to day of like, what is this going to look like for you now when your person or your go-to is not really the one that you want to go to anymore?
Yeah, I find that that trips up a lot of clients. And as much as a breakup is grief processing, I also say that it's like joy processing as well, or like peace processing as well, which is, I don't know how often people sit and ask themselves, like, what would bring me peace right now? Or what would bring me joy right now? And I think when you are reconstructing your daily life, it's a lot of that. Like, it's a lot of well, no one here is, has an opinion on the show I'm about to watch. What do I want to watch with no opinions? I don't have any allergies to consider or dietary preferences. What am I having for dinner? And if you get, the more comfortable you get asking yourself those questions and then like giving yourself whatever you want in those moments, I think it becomes really freeing. Like there's such freedom in that can sometimes be the turning point, like away from sadness and more towards like, oh, I can do, single life, or I really like my own company. And, I'm less sad now because I am crafting my daily life just explicit or like exclusively to my preferences. And I love when clients make it to that point and they're like really excited about something they did for themselves, some activity, hobby they took on that they would never have done in their last relationship, or that their partner was always opposed to, and they do it and it's great. And like that, I mean, I think in a big picture, that's a lot of fun, but it can also be a lot of fun with like small daily decisions that you're making.
I love that you're bringing that up because I have a friend who does a single serving podcast, and her whole focus is around changing the narrative around being single, as that you're not like missing anything here. If anything, you're gaining exactly what you're talking about of like there is so much freedom and just like joy that you can have as a person who gets to do whatever they want, whenever they want. And just to I mean, that podcast is she does amazing work. She's got a great book too called A Single Revolution, and Shani Silver is her name. And she really has helped me and a lot of my clients too when it comes to like crafting. And I think I'm jumping ahead here because I definitely want to hear your take on like the narrative around these breakups and everything. But it's like, how to really settle into yourself and not see that as like a deficit. Like there's no deficit here. It's like that's power, like that's beauty, and freedom and joy. So it is, I think maybe it would be good for us to talk about that process a little bit. Like you were talking about the grieving process, but it's like, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking like, wouldn't that be nice to be like, go through a breakup and be like, you know what, singlehood is the best. And it's like, well, there's like a few things to maybe go through before
Sure.
that.
Right.
So let's talk about that. Like you mentioned grief. So can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, a breakup is a loss. Like we've been discussing, it's a change to your daily routine, maybe your support system. If you work together, it could be disruptive there as well. If you're living together, that's a lot of change. And so I think when that all goes away, it it is, you experience a loss, and I think that losses are worth processing. Like it's important to feel all your feelings around that and to allow yourself to do that, because that's how, what do they say, like the only way to get over something is to go through it. And I think that's the going through it process. um and yeah, I think journaling really helps with that sort of thing. You mentioned playlists earlier. Like heartbreak has been the muse for a lot of amazing art and a lot of amazing albums and songs. And I think that, finding, songs that you really connect with. And as a therapist, I love bringing like art and music and play into the therapy room. And so if a client is really resonating with a song and they bring it to session, like that is so much information for a therapist. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to be able to like, again, sit in the discomfort of that. I think that's like a life skill too. And a breakup kind of creates a nice little opportunity to practice that, and watching yourself move through that grief. Because like with journaling, I mean, I would encourage anybody to just stream of conscious, get it out there, all those thoughts, all those worries and fears, because then later when you're not in the grief space, it's kind of fun to look back on it and either be like, oh my goodness, she was going through it that day, or to be like, wow, you've come a long way. And so that is, that translates to a bunch of different life experiences. I mean, we will all encounter loss of some sort in our life. And a breakup might be like, you know I don't want to say a smaller version of that, but it is an opportunity to practice and prepare, maybe know your patterns around grief and loss.
Yeah, I love that. I'm what's another thing that's coming in mind is like the use of a support system, and maybe it's rebuilding a support system too, because
Mhm.
that might be something that you've lost at least significantly, if not potentially sometimes fully, because of a breakup at times. But as much as possible, kind of rebuilding not only that relationship with yourself, but kind of repouring into relationships around you, whether that's establishing new ones or kind of leaning into them a little bit more for that support, as well, of, you know, in the immediate aftermath, sometimes we have that urge to text or to
Mhm.
call or to send something, and depending on where you land on like what's right for you of the amount of contact you want to have, but
Right.
oftentimes it ends up being on the less to no side of
Mhm.
contact. Maybe you send things to a friend instead and just be like, you might be my designated person for a minute, or spread it out between a couple, or a sibling or whoever you trust,
Mhm.
who can kind of take that of like, you're going to be my person that I'm going to send things to. You can just heart it. You don't necessarily have to respond, but I just need an outlet.
Mhm.
So I don't kind of backtrack in this way that I don't want to. Or even kind of going through and going to places that you'd previously been to as well with your partner that you have really like significant memories attached to, and going with new people. I remember a professor from college had told me that that was like a specific thing that he utilized, because he knew how our synapses need new rewiring. And so if you
Mhm.
go with a new set of people and create new memories at that old place, then that can like actively help you to make new connections in your brain that can replace those old ones, or at least lessen the impact of those. Um, and so just thinking about like that, reestablishing yourself as well, and also reestablishing like that support system as much as possible, which is easier said than done in often ways. But
Mhm.
we also did a podcast on creating community with
There you
someone
go.
that you might know. And so feel free to check that out too.
Well, and something as you're saying that, Sapna, it makes me think about the hesitation that people may have when it comes to doing that, right? Because it's like, yeah, I would love to go to that restaurant, or I would love to listen to that music that was our favorite music or whatever.
Mhm.
And I think it just brings up grief again, right? Where it's like I think about how grief comes in such waves. And so it makes me think of that therapeutic technique, which is like the prescribing the symptom. Like
Mm.
you're likely going to feel a lot of waves of grief when that happens. There may be sadness, there
Yes.
may be anger, there may be the bargaining, there might be some acceptance by the end of at the end of the
Mhm.
night or throughout, who knows? But it's something to say, like, let's prepare you for that. Let's prepare you to feel and to ride those waves of grief when they hit, and to know that that is part of this process. And I love how
Mhm.
you're bringing in the neurobiology of this too, of like,
Yes.
you working through that is also like helping you create those new experiences and the new meaning that, you know, is our goal. But also what we've learned about grief is that's not, it's not like a finish line with that. Like it can still come up, and that's okay. Like that's to be expected because we're human. And this just reminds me too of a seminar I went to one time in undergrad, which was how they say that love and lust are stored differently in the brain. That
Mm.
lust is more of like, you know, maybe honeymoon stages of relationships. It's kind of like a cocaine hit of like, whew, like that quick burst of like, yeah,
Mhm.
like, but it comes and goes, and your brain doesn't really store it in the same way that love does, where love is like, can be stored for a very long time. So it's also like helping make sense of that too, of like, you know, this loss is real, but also like the love may still be there even though the person isn't, and how
Mhm.
to kind of contend with that.
Mhm.
So yeah.
What are, I mean, speaking of kind of making sense of breakups, are there other specific ways that you kind of help clients in making sense of that, or continuing to process the emotional pain during sessions?
Mhm. Yeah. I think it's really important to think about the way that we um, share our story of the breakup, both with ourselves and other. I mean, yeah, when we think about it to ourselves and when we share it with others, because I think, you know, a lot of therapists might agree that there is the problem, and then there's the way that we talk about the problem that can compound suffering. And so, really getting a handle on what is the story you're telling yourself about this experience, and is that making this process easier or more difficult? And so, yeah, I like to work with people around like crafting or reauthoring that narrative that they have. And I think that's done through a lot of exploratory questions like, what drew you to this person in the first place? What was it about your lived experiences prior to that that made those qualities attractive? When did you notice the relationship start to shift? Were there certain behaviors? Was there a conversation? Um, how are you going to be more aware of that shift in the future? What are you going to do if you start to notice that shift in the future? And then, you know, even what did this relationship teach you? What did you learn about yourself or about relationships in general? And I think questions like that can help you craft like just a really authentic way of thinking about this experience for yourself. Because I think if you learn something in that relationship, then it was there for a reason. It served a purpose in your life, and it was, you know, a stepping stone to get to the next place that you're headed. And so I think those sorts of like conversations about the story that we're telling ourselves is is a path towards acceptance of the experience. It is a way of reframing the experience. So yeah.
Yeah. I love that, in that it's also acknowledging like this was intended to be part of your story, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's a painful truth or a freeing truth, or maybe both. But this is just one part of your story, though,
Right.
and there's a lot of meaning that can still be taken from that. It's not something that we necessarily, in some cases for sure, but not necessarily always, want to be erased fully. There's
Mm-hmm.
usually something that we're moving towards, and like at the very least getting to know ourselves better, knowing better what we need or want in a partner, what our needs are in a relationship that we're looking to be met, the way that you can develop a relationship with yourself a little bit more, the responsibilities that you have for your own happiness, et cetera, et cetera. And so I
Mm-hmm.
love that you kind of really help process. I love hearing those questions that you ask too, because it's really helpful to start thinking through that too. Like, did I? Have
Yeah.
I? I have.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in any context too, in the context of any kind of breakup, or even sometimes um there's more casual, like you've only gone on a couple dates with someone, you feel like it shouldn't necessarily be something that's really impacting you, but it has, because again, we are human, and there's a lot of hope attached to things. And so I really appreciate those kinds of questions. Are there any other things that you also support clients around, as far as like moving on, as we're speaking about like continuing to grow and learn? um, are there things that you support clients around when they know like it's right to start dating again, or
Mm-hmm.
making new friends again, or what have you, establishing new relationships, or starting to put themselves out there? Um, what are things that you discuss with your clients around that?
Yeah. Well, in the context of moving on, something I say a lot is like the path to moving on or letting go, and the path towards getting back together are the same path. I mean, you have to focus on yourself, know what you want, know what you need, and that will eventually lead you to being just more discerning in your relationships. I also tell clients that dating is like essentially data collection. Like you're meeting someone, you're interacting with them, and they're just giving you a ton of data about how they see the world, how they communicate, what their values are. And so if you kind of go into dating as like, okay, I'm just collecting data on this other person, it makes dating like a lot easier to maneuver through. And I think that, in order to make it easier, you do have to do some reflection on your past experience, um, in order to get clarity and kind of be like, oh yeah, that person, doesn't know how to accept responsibility and apologize. They're very defensive. I want someone who's comfortable apologizing when they've done something wrong. And so, like, okay, I kind of have enough information about you, and you can either talk to that person about what you need or just kind of know that maybe they're not ready for that type of relationship. So, yeah, so that's why I think it's so important to like really sit and ask yourself the hard questions, and use a breakup as a learning opportunity, just to get to know yourself better. And I think like every ending of a significant relationship, if you've done the work to reflect, it makes the next one that much easier. And you can enter it with, that much more confidence about yourself. And so it is pretty attached to like the self-esteem piece of just knowing what you want, being comfortable advocating for yourself. And yeah, I mean, going in with the mindset that this can be easier. Not all relationships are going to end up like this one, and probably for good reason. Like, we don't want to repeat those patterns. And so if you notice yourself with particular patterns in dating, I would encourage you to do the hard work of reflecting on the experience and consciously make a decision to do something different in the future. Even if it's just one thing, it might make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. I think that's where that journaling comes into as you go, of like
Mhm.
really helping with the self-reflection of understanding like what are my key takeaways from each of those relationships that had those breaks.
Mhm.
Man, I feel like I could keep talking about this forever. I have so many
Right.
other random things that are going through my head. I'm like, how do we pull those in?
I
But
know.
what else yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say how much I love the data
Yeah.
analogy too. It's really speaking to my
Yeah.
research nerd, and it
Right.
makes sense. You kind of have to process the previous data in order to really fully be able to gather the new data. Um,
Well, and
I like,
it's not as much about like, are they gonna like me? Are they gonna love me? Am I gonna be enough, to your point, Bianca,
Yes.
around like self-esteem? Like, am I gonna be enough for them? It's more of like, because of this process that I had to, and I went through, I persevered through,
Mhm.
what I learned about myself, like, will this person match the needs that I have? So it's a very helpful shift, I think, that a lot of the
Mhm.
clients I support that are in dating do tend to be more self, like, am I gonna be good enough for them? I'm like,
Right.
yeah,
let's figure out what would be good enough for you, actually,
Mhm.
you know?
Right.
yep.
That
Help
comes up a
you.
lot with my clients too.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's natural, I
And
think,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
becoming the chooser, not the one who's chosen,
Mhm.
and stepping into that,
Ooh, I
knowing
like
what
that.
that looks like.
I
What do
like
you
that.
want to choose?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's not mine.
Good.
That's stolen from dating people that
Oh,
I've
I was like,
talked
we're gonna quote you on that one.
Yeah. That's the
Feel
full
free.
quote.
That's on me.
Yeah.
Yes, my bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. This has been super helpful and really genuinely feel like I could keep going. Hence,
Mhm.
I had to sneak in the comments about the data.
Mhm.
But what else do we not touch on or expand on or want to make sure is a takeaway for people as we kind of wrap up
Mhm.
our conversation here today?
Yeah. I mean, I think I alluded to this earlier, but there are so many wonderful resources. I mean, I talked about the trash that exists on YouTube,
Yeah.
but there are other really wonderful resources out there. There's a great podcast called Heal Your Heartbreak, I believe, and it's just the host invites therapists, different authors and experts on the subject to just offer advice. She even has like listeners share their own stories, and so it's just so relatable. Trying to think, there's some good follows on Instagram. Jillian Turecki, I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she is so wise when it comes to relationships and has a lot of good content about breakups. Certainly a ton of books. One that I enjoy is Lighter by Young Pueblo. He was also someone I found on Instagram. But it's all about like acceptance and letting go and just coming to peace with hard change, like a breakup.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I have
They're
more
great
resources.
resources. And we'll definitely put those in the show notes too, because
Mhm.
those all sound like ideal go-tos for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you
Oh,
so much for joining us today, Bianca. This was
yeah.
fun, and I really hope that everyone who was listening found some benefit to their process and whichever stage you might be in. And maybe you're a supporter of someone who is going through this and have
Mhm.
some good takeaways around how you can aim to hold some space for that person to be able to kind of walk their own walk as they try to figure out what's the right direction for themselves within those
Mhm.
relationships. So thank you for your time and for just all of your feedback. And I just also want to say, like, I'm just grateful that people get to work with you as a therapist. So how would people find you?
Well, I work at a group practice called Ortiz Therapy Group. The owner of our practice just did an episode with y'all. So
Yeah.
definitely encourage y'all to check that one out on building community.
Mhm.
But yeah, we are on Instagram and Facebook at ortiztherapygroup.com or Ortiz Therapy Group. And then we have our website, ortiztherapygroup.com. So yeah, you can find me there.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
guys so
Thank you
much.
so much.
It was so fun. All right.